Today we're going to be talking about Laravel. It's going to be a pretty basic introduction just to Laravel 4. Someone asked a second ago, so Laravel 3 was kind of the stable for a while, but when was it? It'd be mid-2013 maybe. They transitioned over to Laravel 4, and that's all we'll be covering. So if anyone has, like, say a legacy app and you're wanting to transition from 3 to 4, feel free to get with me later. The old version of this talk actually covered that, but now that 4 is stable, I've transitioned all that out. But I'll still be happy to talk about it, and I still have a deck on it. So if you need that, you can grab it on Speaker Deck. Who am I? So you can reach me on Twitter at Ben Edmunds, no spaces. So feel free to hit me up with any questions afterwards, or just tell me how much I suck afterwards. He's pretty good at doing that back there. And yeah, so right now I lead a team for Mindfulware. We do insurance and medical software. A lot of white labeled stuff are, it's like the whole software system a hospital would use, for instance, and all the interactions there. I'm most well known for IONOff, which is a authentication library for CodeIgniter. And CodeIgniter's, it's kind of dying off now, so I'm going to have to change out this slide eventually, but that's still how most people know me. I'm from Alabama, so if you catch an accent coming out every now and then, and it just happens at random, because I haven't lived there in a little while, but don't freak out. Right now I'm living in Portland, Oregon, so if you want to talk about beer, or if you want to complain about the rain, I'm really good at both of those. Use CodeIgniter, Laravel, and Swim, mostly with PHP. With JavaScript, I'm mostly doing Angular right now, but then I've also messed around in a ton of stuff. So really, just feel free to come chat about any of that if it interests you, and especially how you might use those JavaScript stuff with Laravel, if that's a question. All right, let's get into it. So what is Laravel? It's an open source PHP framework. It's pretty new on the scene, but it's quickly kind of snowballed into a decent sized community. I say full stack, I used to say half stack, I used to say lightweight, but it just keeps growing. So it's hard to say anymore. And also, in my opinion, it's hard to kind of pinpoint frameworks like that anymore. Now that we have Composer and now that packages are more interchangeable, it's not quite as clear cut as lightweight or heavy framework, that sort of thing. Because you use what you need to, you don't use what you don't need to. It was created by Taylor Otwell, and Del Rees is also on the development team. Taylor works for Userscape, and their product is HelpSpot. If anyone does any kind of customer service, you might have used that. It's a pretty cool app. It's hosted, or self-hosted, rather. They actually sponsor development, so he gets work time to work on it. So it's not an official company backing, but it's Taylor. But then he also has the backing of the company to give him time to do it. So it's not one of those he spent 2 hours on it and then he abandoned it kind of thing. He usually spends a week of work time a month working on it. So it is actively improving. Del is the author of CodeHappy and a core contrib to it. CodeHappy is kind of the leading book on Laravel. It's almost like all-encompassing. So if you are interested, I really recommend grabbing that book. It's on LeanPub, and it's just a huge guide. Will answer every question you might have. So the big question is, why should you use Laravel? And that's really what the whole talk is going to be about. I'm not going to really try to tell you how to write a monolithic app in it. I'm just going to convince you to try it, hopefully, and then you can be the judge from there. All right, it has an expressive syntax, and if you were in my API talk, you know that that's a pretty big deal to me. What that means is that you're using words to construct statements that make sense in code. It's kind of hard to explain, but you can see it right here. So view make home, so we're making the home view with user. So we're going to make it with the user variable in the view. Should be pretty self-explanatory. The whole idea behind it is most of your method calls are only going to take 1 or 2 parameters. They're only going to be a couple words long, and they're not going to have like bools at the end that do who knows what unless you check the docs. So it's going to be very expressive. So if you do need a bool for something, there's going to be a separate method to set that flag so you know exactly what's going on when you glance at this code. You shouldn't have to read the docs to get a good idea of what's happening at least. All right, it uses the latest PHP features. So namespaces, abstract classes, statics, which we'll get into later. Facades, which is, so as you see there at the bottom, it looks like that's a static on session put, but it's actually a facade. Paul will argue with me later in the Q&A about if that's really any different. So what you're actually doing there, though, is you're looking up the service locator. So you're looking up that service of the session, and it's basically just doing all the boilerplate for you so that you don't have to define your namespace and all that other crap in order to do that work. It's already done for you, and you just call it through that static call. That's called a facade because it looks like this, but what it's actually doing is all this. It's well documented. So this has been kind of the big thing with frameworks. They used to be pretty crappy with their documentation, but in the past several years, most frameworks actually have good documentation now. There's still some that are kind of struggling along, but Laravel is not any different than any of the main competitors now. Has good documentation. Pretty much anything you need is going to be in there. It comes with what it calls the Artisan CLI tool. If you've used Rails, CLI tools will probably be pretty familiar to you. There's also a lot of the modern PHP frameworks are having those now. This here is just an example of how you would run database migrations from the command line. But it has many different methods available. You can do remote SSH commands, for example, or you can even scaffold with it. It is PSR 0 and 1 compliant at the moment. It's not 2, and it's not planned to be 2 compliant. I believe they're going to be 4 compliant from what I've read, but right now, just 0 and 1. If you don't know what PSRs are, and you have lots of time to discuss it, is Paul here? Yeah. Paul Jones, back there, raised hand. He's on the team that defines these, and what they are basically is standards on how, My God. This is what you get if you ask him about it, so you gotta have a lot of time, okay? They're recommendations of how you should accomplish things or structure things in general. It's made by the Framework Interoperability Group, so it's a bunch of frameworks got together originally, and now it has everyone that ever touched PHP working in it. But a bunch of frameworks got together and decided, hey, we're doing a lot of the same stuff. We should kind of, standardize some of this stuff, basically. Paul will give you a much better explanation. It's built on Composer. Who here knows what Composer is? Okay. For those that don't, think of what Pair wanted to be, and then Composer actually did that. So it's a very good dependency management system, basically. So you host your library there, and then anybody can use it. But it's libraries that, for the most part, actually work across frameworks, across platforms, that sort of thing. It's built on that, so that means it reuses a lot of components. It actually used something like 13 components from Symphony. All the routing, especially, is all Symphony. A lot of the console tools, they import Symphony, and then they just kind of build on top of that. And it's really a kind of culture change in PHP. So it's not all these frameworks just doing their own thing anymore. You kind of take what you want from other frameworks and build upon that. And Laravel definitely embraces that. It's, last note there, it's modular, so you can pull it in and get rid of packages as needed. It has good test coverage, and it has a very big focus on testing in the community and just in the framework code, which is pretty nice if you're used to dealing with any legacy apps. It has Sinatra style writing, and I say Sinatra style because that's what most people kind of identify with as kind of the first one to do this, even though I'm sure it's not. A lot of PHP frameworks are doing this now. But the general idea is that you're going to do your routing, you decide what HTTP verb you're going to respond to, and then you just pass it, usually some type of regex type string to denote what you're going to respond to. So in this case, if you were to put /users in your browser, localhost /users or whatever you're running on, it would run this method, and it's using an anonymous function. The Eloquent ORM is a bundled ORM, but it's not required that you use it. It also bundles a query builder, or you can run raw SQL, as most frameworks allow. You can also, because it's composer-based, you can use other ORMs if you want to. I'm going to touch on the Eloquent ORM because it is actually very nice. And prior to Eloquent, I was never a fan of the ORM, so maybe I'll be able to sell you on at least trying it. I'm still in the mindset that you use it for basic stuff or use it for an MVP, and then make sure you go back later and really optimize and write actual queries if you've got something crazy going on. Here's an example of what it looks like. You're just defining a new user, you're setting their ID, and then you're saving them. And that save will actually run an insert to the database. And then later, you could still reference that user object. You don't have to go find them again. But as an example, if you wanted to go find that user later, just user find and then the ID, and that'll go pull in that user object. So it will definitely save you a lot of time versus writing all these queries yourself. All right, I'm trying to go a little fast today, so we're going to really kind of skip through these pretty quick. But I'm going to just do a couple of comparisons to other frameworks. And it's really not even saying, like, hey, this is much better or anything. It's just kind of comparing. But then, I am biased because I am here to talk about Laravel. CodeIgniter. As I mentioned earlier, CodeIgniter is really dying off. It's kind of an older mindset with PHP frameworks. It's monolithic, but it's not really that compatible outside of itself. So you've got a million libraries that were only for CodeIgniter. Or you've got libraries that were modified, forked off from something else and just modified for CodeIgniter. That's really, that's going away. It's not the new style of framework. It's not going to be interoperable with other stuff. It was very fast, very lightweight, which was its main selling point. And at the time, it had great docs when most other frameworks didn't. So it got a huge following. And actually, we're seeing now that a lot of the users that were on CodeIgniter have since moved over to Laravel. PHP actually came out around the same time as Laravel, and it was several community members from CodeIgniter actually got fed up with how slow CodeIgniter was to develop, and they made Fuel. It is a very good framework, but the community never really took off, and so the framework's still going strong, actually, but it doesn't have that community aspect to it. It's very similar to Laravel in a lot of ways, except for like the facade pattern. You don't have that there. And if anyone's looked at this before, it is actually much better than it used to be. They used to just be like in static craziness for a while. They don't do that so much anymore. Zen Framework, most all of us have probably seen this, or maybe even used it. It's kind of the classic example of the monolithic framework. ZF2 is getting better with that, but it still has like this crazy learning curve attached to it. And that's really like the biggest reason not to use it for a lot of people. If you've got a team and you need to spin up people fast or whatever, you're going to lose them for a while on Zen. And also, it can still get pretty bloated pretty quick. Personally, I'm not a fan, but a lot of people are, and you can still build a great app with whatever framework you choose. I don't know why I'm pointing this at the screen, because my laptop's over there. But. All right, Symphony. Symphony is actually one of my favorite frameworks, even though I don't use it much anymore. It's very well architected, very well designed, but it still tends to be on the heavy side. But they kind of fixed that with Silex. It's Silex is like their micro framework pulled from components from Symphony. So really, you've got the best of both worlds there. I really recommend trying Symphony if you haven't. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I'm not here to talk about Symphony. All right, we get to Laravel. One unique aspect of it, especially if you've used like the Zen or CodeIgniter, is the design pattern here. So it's model, view, controller, or route. You don't have to have controllers at all. You can just have routes. You always have to have routes, but you can just pretty much tell them, hey, just load controllers. So you can have what you're used to with MVC, or you can go a little newer and just use routes, or you can actually use a combination of both. And that tends to be a pretty good way to do it. So simpler things tend to stay in routes, and then if you've got something kind of crazy going on, throw it in a controller so it's self-contained. One last thing to mention there is it's kind of an interesting pattern that Taylor followed when he made this. He was a .NET developer, and he came to PHP in like PHP 5.3. So most of us and most of the other framework creators have been here for a very long time in PHP. And you tend to just kind of be used to things a certain way. He didn't really have any of that going on because he didn't know PHP before 5.3. And it had a lot of fresh ideas. Ideas seem to converge at a certain point across things. So with some of the newer changes to frameworks, it's not as different. But as you get into it, I think you'll see that it's kind of the fresh take in a lot of ways. All right, so hopefully by now I've convinced you to at least take a closer look. So we're going to kind of dig into what it looks like to use a Laravel project. To create a project with Laravel, you don't have to go download a zip file. You could if you wanted to. But you use Composer to install it. And this is assuming you already have Composer installed. If you don't, go to packages.org, and it'll walk you through it all. It's super simple. Here you're just calling Composer create project. You're passing in what you want. You set your project name, which is new proj in this instance. And it's going to automatically pull down and set up a new Laravel project for you to get going on. So super simple to get started if you want to check it out. We already discussed that. All right, this is what it looks like if you pull it down. So you have your application layer. You have Laravel, which is the core framework files. And then you have public. So public is what you would want to set your vhost to if you're using Apache, so that you're not serving your core application files through the browser. This is pretty simple stuff, but a lot of frameworks don't default to this. So you'd be shocked at how many websites go to production with their core files out there. You create routes at application routes.php. They're going to look like what I showed you earlier, and I'll show you more. A lot of people get messed up here, though, because they think they just have to put all their routes in this one file. There's no reason you have to do that. There's tools to sort them better, or you can do something as easy as just including separate files that you want. All right, this is what it looks like just to echo some data to the browser. Route get / means that on our project there, we're going to / from whatever directory it's running into. And then, of course, you have public there. And then just echo boom here, and you see boom on your screen. To run the test associated with your application, these are your application tests. All you have to do is type PHP Artisan Test from your command line, and it's going to go into that directory, and it's going to run all your test files. This uses a PHP unit, so you're going to be doing PHP unit test here. This is what a simple test looks like to make sure that that get route we just did works. And this is a stupid, dumb test, but it shows you what's going on here. So we have routes.test.php. We're doing some scaffolding for PHP unit class, whatever. And then we're just doing response route forward. So that route forward says, just go pull this route and tell me what you get back. Assert equals, that's a PHP unit thing saying, hey, make sure A equals B. And we're saying make sure boom equals response. Then we run PHP Artisan Test, and then that should be our output for a good test. And if you've used PHP unit at all, that should look pretty familiar. It's just more the aspect to show you that Laravel integrates it and expects you to write tests, and the community is very supportive of tests. testing. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about building an API with Laravel, but it's going to be more of how we're handling the routes here. So this is what pulling a user would look like. We're just doing a GET request, API user, and then the ID. And what we're returning back is just a JSON encoded array with the user, and then we're using Eloquent to find that user. One kind of cool trick with Laravel is you don't actually have to do the JSON encode here, because if you return an array instead of the view, it'll automatically assume that you're doing an API or something like that, and it'll return JSON automatically. So you can strip that out too, but it's here just to show you what's going on. All right, this is what it would look like to create a user. So here we're doing just a put request, API user. Then we're doing a create. So on the create, we're just passing through an array of everything we want to set. And this is, in the back end, it's going in and it's doing an insert. This probably won't look too crazy to anyone that's used ORM, but it might look kind of cool if you haven't. We'll respond back with the data. You'll notice here that we did user create, and then immediately down below we use that object. That's because it returned it back. And it returns the full object. A lot of things will just return the ID, and then you have to query again. You don't have to do that with this, so it saves you that step, and you can just call the ID off of it. All right, routes are cool, but a lot of people are, really attached to controllers, and for good reason. I mean, they have a good purpose. All right, so all we have to do in our route is controller detect, and that'll give you kind of your standard, like CodeIgniter or Zen style routing. So it's just going to route, it's going to take your routes and just map them straight to controllers. And so, if you had a user's controller, your user's endpoint would go to that. So standard stuff there if you do that. All right, what do we support? The basics it supports is get, post, put, and delete. Or you can do any, and it'll just respond to any route that's passed. There's more things you can do too. You can do a filter. Hold on, I went too far. You can register. So you can register multiple routes. So we could say, hey, we don't want to respond to delete here. We just want to respond to get and post. And you can do that. All right, filters. So this is kind of cool, actually. So we're going to define a filter here. Normally you do this by, maybe setting up a class and then passing it through with dependency injection or something like that to your controller. Or either just setting up a global object if this was 5 years ago. So what you're doing here, though, is you're just saying anything that hits the off filter, we're going to run our authentication check on it. And if they're not logged in, we're going to redirect them to the login page. Pretty simple. And then all we have to do to use this later is we just say before off here. And this is saying before we hit this route at all, run that filter and do whatever it says. So instead of having, stuff strewn through every controller or having some external dependency within your app, you just define that before filter and it'll automatically run that every time. There's before, after, and then there's some other internal filters you can do, just depending on what you want to do. So say you wanted to do like analytics after every page load, you can do an after filter to just automatically track your analytics. You can also pattern match, so you can do a filter and then just pretty much patch in a regex. So you can say, hey, respond to any of this with this closure here. All right, you have options. So you have Fluent Query Builder or you have Eloquent. If you don't want to use the ORM, you can use just build your queries manually. It's also a schema builder that actually works pretty well cross database, and it's using PDO behind it, so everything should work pretty well anyway. But a lot of frameworks had a problem where if you switch from MySQL to Postgres, you have pretty crappy support between the two. I haven't run into any of those problems yet. I use Postgres mainly, but then all my open source stuff supports usually Postgres and MySQL. So I do a fair bit of switching back and forth, and I've yet to run into a problem. It has migrations built in. Who's used database migrations? Wow, okay. Pretty good number, actually. The idea behind database migrations is that you're going to put some type of version number or identifier to your database changes. And then, in this case, your framework's going to keep up with those changes. So, let's say you do an alter and you add a field to your users table. How do you keep track of that change between local dev, staging server, production server? That can get pretty hairy pretty quick if you try to do it manually. But with migrations, it handles all that for you. So when you do the deploy to staging, it'll check and it'll say, hey, the migrations don't match up, let's run them. And then you're up to date. All right, so with the query builder, this is how we would query email. Well, we're querying a user by their email. So we're just building it, basically. It's going to generate SQL on the back end. No big deal here. Insert get ID. So this is something else I want to point out. So as it's expressive, you don't just have insert here because you wouldn't know that you're going to return the ID. Here you have insert get ID. So Laravel throughout will tell you what's going on by the method names. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're reading through somebody else's code, it's very helpful. Eloquent, it follows the same rules, so it's simple, expressive. It's actually pretty efficient, and we'll walk through that a little bit. ORMs in recent years have gotten much better, so they're not the horrible beast you might be used to them being. They have tons of problems, don't get me wrong, but for pretty basic stuff, joins here and there, they handle it just fine. It's pretty performant now. This is how you would define a model. So just by doing this, you'll be able to do CRUD on a user's table with just this file set up. This is how you would query. So all we have is that defined in our model. We have the users table created. It's going to automatically assume that your table is named users if your model is named user. And then we could query by their email just like that. So we take users, call the facade, where their email is that, and then we get the first row. You could also get a result here and get all the rows if there was going to be more than one. Slightly more advanced query, so say it's not so simple, you want to do some type of operation. Here we're doing a greater than. So we're pulling, where the views are greater than 100, whether views means. It's just an example there. All right, defining relationships is also pretty easy. So here we're just saying that for each post, the post will have a user. And then just with defining that one method, here at the bottom we're able to call post find user email. What that does is that's going to find the first post, and then the next section there, arrow user, is going to go get the user for that post, and then we can access all of their data under that. So here we're getting that user's email. So this is the email address of the user that created the post in this case. And you can see it's only one line to do that in your app, and then that one extra method in the model. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about how to, and this works for most ORMs. This is called eager loading or lazy. So lazy loading is when you do this. Eager loading is what we're going to talk about to make it more performant. Again, most ORMs support this, but I want to show it because if you haven't used an ORM in a while, you probably don't know about this. And this is one of people's main gripes with ORMs. Here, you run this. So you're going to do post all, which is going to get all of the posts. So they're probably, let's say they're a blog post. And then we're going to pull the user's email for those. So say we're doing, just a listing of authors, for instance. That would be 101 queries against your database like that. Because we're going to do that initial query to get all the posts, and then for each post, and you've got 100 in this case, you're going to end up with 100 more queries to get that data. So that's what's happening. And that's most people's response because they write the code just like that, and then their site is horrible, and they say ORM stuff. Eager loading is what you need here. So here we're going to say post with user get. So that tells us with the post, when you query those, also query the users. We already know the relationship because it's set up in the model. So that can automatically be pulled in. That takes that 101 queries down to 2 queries. And the way it does that is just doing select star users where in, and it pulls on all those IDs. Make sense? All right, views. It has a pretty basic view layer. It gives you your basic, templating and stuff. It's called Blade templating that it uses. It's nothing crazy really, but I kind of like that. I don't like Smarty. I don't like templating languages that do too much. Most of the time, I can get by with simple PHP echoes and ifs. Blade is pretty much that, PHP echoes and ifs with a few shortcuts to make things cleaner. So like if you want to do, if A is set, then show A, else show B. I'm sure you've done that in your basic ternary that you do all throughout your views. Blade simplifies that a little bit, so you can just say, A or B, and it'll try to load A, and if A is not set, it'll load B. So it gives you a few shortcuts. The way you're going to create a view here is from your route, you just do view make, and then the name of the view. It uses the dot syntax here, but this is the directory it's actually loading. So views home index.php. To send data to a view, there's a couple ways you can do it. Either you can define an array of data to pass to the view, or you can use the with method. With is just going to just send one piece of data at a time, key value pairs. I don't end up using with much, but it's easy to show on a slide because it's just one extra line. Usually I've got a lot of data I'm sending, and so that's not too good of representation. But if you just have a little data, it's nice and easy. You can also send data to the view with magic methods. So you define your view here, and then you're just going to set the email on the object. And it's doing, of course, some magic behind the scenes to say, okay, they called a set on the email. Let's go ahead and set that and pass that through to the view. All right, we're going to get into a little fun here. So one of the big controversies with Laravel is facades. And the main reason for that is that people see statics littered around the code. And first off, you think that it's not going to be testable. So if you've done much testing, you know that just in general, static methods are horrible for testing. But as I mentioned earlier a little bit, the facade is actually resolving and looking up your service. So it's not just a straight static call. It's actually just a shortcut, so you don't have to look up the namespaces and then pass through for dependency injection into your controllers and all that kind of stuff. It automatically does all that for you. So what's happening when you do a session get, it's actually pulling the app container. It's resolving the session class, or it's probably actually named something different, but that's the shortcut to it in the facade. And then it's actually calling that method on the resolved class. So you're still able to do dependency injection. You're still able to test just as well as you could without calling it that way. The main real advantage here is that it makes it super easy for a beginner to get started, or even if you're trying to hack something real quick, you don't have to have 10 include statements and look up all the namespaces for each thing you need. You just call the facade and it's there. Another big kind of caveat with this that people bring up is class responsibilities. So if you're using facades everywhere, that really just kind of separates your concerns with your class. So in general, you wouldn't want, your controller class, depends on your kind of design theory for your application, but people say you wouldn't want to have this touching sessions and databases and, A, B, C, D, E, okay? Because you want to separate your concerns. So you want a small class that does one thing and does it well, not a large class that does 50 things. And the facades do kind of facilitate this bad design pattern of doing 50 things because it's just so easy to do. You don't have to think about what's actually going on behind the scenes, performance or testing-wise. You still have full options to inject here and use it that way. You could just fully look it up, or you can just do this in controllers. And so here in the constructor, we're just passing through what we want, and then we're naming it session. And then in that constructor, we're just naming this session to session. So here, we wouldn't use the session facade. We would use this. But this is a really good pattern because it also gives you that visibility into what all is this class touching. You can load up this controller, you can look at the constructor, and you see exactly the dependencies it's going to need. This would be how you do a second one, same thing. Facades are really just a way to expose a simple static API so that you don't have just, strings and strings of namespace resolving in there. It still keeps testing at the fourth run. I'm going to repeat because this is the major issue people have with it. You can still test this just as easily. There's been a lot of drama lately. I'm going to mention some stuff here just in case you look up Laravel and then you see kind of the feedback there. Laravel is a new community, so it has growing pains. And there's a lot of people that criticize it for the facades especially because they don't understand how it works in the back end. But then there's also, there's a lot of fanboys right now. And so somebody says something bad about Laravel, and then just people go crazy over it. Again, Paul Jones has been the recipient of the fanboys. You're fine. But, so don't let that, go ahead. Yeah, it was. But don't let that deter you. It is a very good community. It's young. Did we discuss that? Oh, no, okay. This slide's out of order, actually. So I repurposed an old Laravel 3 talk, and apparently I messed up the order. This is actually how you would inject a dependency to override it for testing, is you just call this app session, and then you can throw in a new class that would override the session library that you might want to test against. Keeping up with framework changes. So in the past, framework changes have been a huge deal. So you might get, release notes, and then it says, hey, replace these 4 files here and there. Or you might, if it's a newer framework, you might run a git command against your current application, but that can be hairy too if you don't know what you're doing. With this, it's using Composer, which this isn't anything like crazy with Laravel. It's just something new that comes with frameworks that run off Composer. We're just going to do a Composer var update, and it's going to pull in all the updates to the framework, and you're done. You're up to date. There are some caveats here in how you set up your requirements files with Composer, but once you get that set up, you define what level you want to be on, or you can be always on the newest. You run this, and it's just automatically updates you. Release schedule is set. So right now we're on 4.1, and 4.2 is coming out in May. They actually haven't had any real breaking changes since 4.0. They plan to keep it that way, but we are getting, pretty incremental, but, well-deserved changes each dot release. And that's it. Hopefully, I tried to go through fast so I could get you out of here a little early since this is the last talk. It looks like I failed. I'm sorry. Yeah, just really little recap there. Please try it if you're interested at all in what I've said. Have any questions, feel free. It's on GitHub. There's docs and forums. The forums are super active. So if you're, frameworks are about more than just the code. They're also about the community, about having those other developers to interact with, the other people to build on, and really just the sense of community and tribalism. Laravel has a very active community. So if you're looking for that, check it out. For resources, Del Reed's book, which I already mentioned, it's on LeapHub. Laravel from Apprentice to Artisan, it's a small book that the creator of Laravel wrote. So I definitely recommend it. It's a little more architecture and not so much just walkthrough like Del's book is. There's also Laracast, which is a screencast website, and it's just all Laravel screencasts for like $10 a month. And it's actually super helpful. Thank you. I'm Ben Edmunds, no spaces on Twitter. And if you liked the talk or hated it, check out Joined In and leave me some feedback. Tell me what I can do better, or just rate it. Let me know I did okay. Thanks for your time, and have a good night.